everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This webinar today is part of our Wednesdays with the World series that highlights the ways in which the quest for justice is intersectional and global, allowing United Church of Christ members greater opportunities for increased awareness of global concerns and highlighting options for advocacy and action. Today's webinar is called Towards a Sustainable Future. So the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The SDGs were set in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. They are the core of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The SDGs are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. So I'm thankful for you all joining us today. My name is Becca Choate. I am Associate for Global Advocacy and Education with Global Ministries of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and the United Church of Christ, our shared mission agency between our two denominations. And I would like to introduce you all to our panelists who are here with us today to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Matthew Ross is the Program Executive for Diaconia and Capacity Building with the World Council of Churches based in Geneva, Switzerland since 2018. He's a minister of the Church of Scotland and ordained in 1998. He's a former parish minister in Scotland and former General Secretary of Scotland's National Ecumenical Organization. And he's from Edinburgh, Scotland. Welcome, Matthew. Joining Matthew is Ryan Smith, who is the Program Executive responsible for the Ecumenical Liaison Office to the United Nations, also for the World Council of Churches. He's worked in the UN community for different Christian organizations for more than 12 years. And Ryan is enjoying spending time with his rescue dog, Rufus, as he works remotely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then finally, our third panelist today is the Reverend Susan Mitchell, who's currently serving as the United Church of Christ Church Building and Loan Fund's Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives. She's been a member of the UCC National Staff for over 11 years, and she has served over 23 years in parish ministry, currently serving as Associate Minister of Rush Memorial Congregational Church, located on the campus of Atlanta University Center. So welcome all three of you today. So I want to start with, I think we'll start with Matthew. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the SDGs in the context of the World Council of Churches and its member organizations?
Thank you very much, Becca. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Greetings from across the Atlantic, and good morning or good afternoon to wherever you are in the United States. It's 8 o'clock in the evening here, but it's great to be with you. The Sustainable Development Goals are a United Nations program running between 2015 and 2030. 17 different goals. The World Council of Churches is not able to directly, actively be engaged in every single one of them all the time. But one of my remits, along with a number of other areas, is to take an overview of the whole of the SDGs. So I have this overall overarching responsibility, but I'd like to say particularly about some of the work that some of my colleagues do, because they specialize on individual areas. First of all, I'll just say a bit about how they're structured. That the office which looks after the SDG agenda of the United Nations is based in New York. the Department for Economic and Social Affairs has its division for the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's all based in New York. The other major center for UN activity is here in Geneva in Switzerland, where most of the UN agencies have their headquarters. And also there's the UN administration building here as well. It all dates back to before the Second World War, when it was the headquarters of the then League of Nations. But the SDGs are primarily run from the New York office. And it's great that we have Ryan, who is the liaison person with for the WCC with the United Nations in New York, because it would be completely inappropriate to do it all from Geneva. Now, some of the individual SDGs, I'll focus on some of them. Firstly, SDG 3 on health and well-being. One particular area we do work on is on HIV and AIDS. And my colleague Nyambura from Kenya is the coordinator of the EHIA program, the Ecumenical Health and HIV AIDS Initiative. She coordinates that. A lot of the work is done from Nairobi as well. We have a particularly important relationship with the UN on HIV AIDS issues. In fact, at one point, the HIV AIDS office of the UN was actually based within the Ecumenical Center in Geneva for some time. So it's an extremely important legacy in its ongoing work. Another area, appropriate just to have a sip of water before, is on water itself. My colleague Dinesh Sunna from India, who's in the neighboring office to me in Geneva, he is our coordinator of on water issues. There's the Ecumenical Water Network, which he is the secretary and coordinator of. Now, think about it yourselves. How often do you just go to what we here would call a tap and you would call a faucet, and you just open it up and clean water comes out and you don't give any thought to it whatsoever? We do that every day, all of us, all the time. Now, in so many countries, there are millions and millions of people, in fact, billions, without access to safe drinking water. I was in Mozambique a couple of years ago, and yeah, the necessity to boil water all the time before drinking it. After a while, it becomes a matter of habit. What if you don't have access to that water? You don't have a kettle, you don't have electricity to boil it. There are major, major issues here on access to water and sanitation. It is a human right. So Dinesh does fantastic work, both within our own Ecumenical Water Network, but also in a lobbying capacity with the UN and advocacy capacity with the UN as well. He has been to high-level platform meetings in New York, and we have an active ongoing engagement. Perhaps I should stop for a moment and just see if any of the other panelists wanted to come in, just in response to anything I've said so far.
Thanks, Matthew. Those are two of the SDGs Also meant to mention earlier, some of you may remember back in the year 2000, the Millennium Development Goals. That's kind of the predecessor to these Sustainable Development Goals, but that was focused on eradicating extreme poverty. So there's been a bit of a legacy here talking about sustainable development. So we went from the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015, and then now the SDGs are 2015 to 2030. So it's kind of been this ongoing partnership and project of the UN around sustainable development. Just to add in a little bit of history that I forgot to mention earlier.
You're absolutely right. The big worry at the moment with the SDGs is the question of relevancy. The work was always going to be challenging, but we've suddenly now hit COVID, and it has set things back enormously. In some ways, maybe the best estimate is, let's hope that by 2030 we have not gone back to before the 2015 level. That's a really tragic admission. But if we didn't have the SDGs, then that would be really terrible. The SDGs are far from perfect. Of the 17, there are issues which are missing, really vital issues which are missing, like there's no reference to indigenous peoples. That's a glaring omission. But nevertheless, the overall principle of lifting the 1 billion poorest people in the world out of grinding poverty is something of crucial importance. And that is the basic aim, to make life a bit better for the world's poorest 1 billion people. But the tragedy at the moment is, and particularly with COVID, is there's far too much of an attitude around of saying, well, it's all very sad, but, well, we can't possibly achieve it given COVID. There's issues such as the environmental crisis. This decade is absolutely crucial in historic terms about addressing climate change. If we don't address it this decade, there is the real danger of going over the tipping point. The cost of any cleanup after that is incalculable to what we might have to spend now. So, and that is all part of the SDG agenda. So if we don't address it now, we can't just say it's got to be on hold because governments are having to borrow money to deal with COVID. That's just not good enough. Now, I come from Scotland, part of the United Kingdom. The UK has just announced it is going to increase the number of nuclear missiles it owns, well, nuclear bombs it owns, by 40%. That's, to me, it seems absolutely extraordinary at a time when the UK's national debt has nearly doubled in the last 10 years. It seems so utterly immoral and wrong. That is just one example. We're seeing militarization, expenditure on the military around the world is absolutely colossal. Of course, the United States is by far the biggest in that respect. But if even a fraction of that money globally, it's not just about saying United States bad, UK bad, or anywhere else, China or Russia or anywhere. It's all of us together. If just some of that money could get diverted to make the SDGs actually possible, then what a difference that would make. So yes, there's a bit of an evangelical zeal about this, because if we take the message of Jesus in John 10:10 seriously, I have come that you may have life in all its fullness. The SDGs may be substandard, but my goodness, do they have an opportunity to make a difference for people who really, really need it. I went in 2019 to Kenya, to the Masai Mara, and to see work being done by Christian Aid, the UK-based church-related development agency. And their work being done on about empowering women, gender justice issue for the SDGs, SDG 5, the difference that it made with microfinance initiative, which for a wealthy country, this is peanuts in financial terms, but the difference it made to individual lives was absolutely unbelievable. And issues of domestic violence had gone down, empowerment and education and opportunities were just transformed. It was for a comparatively small group of women. But for these people, that was absolutely massive. And I hope that if I was in such a situation, other people would want to give me a helping hand. I've had a lot of helping hands in life. All of us probably have. But we are interdependent in this world. And so it is right that the church takes an interest in the SDG agenda.
Matthew, I'm going to jump off here from you maybe just a little bit. You were just mentioning gender justice, and one of the places that the World Council of Churches and the United Church of Christ work together is on gender justice within the UN system at the UN Commission on the Status of Women. So these SDGs, these Sustainable Development Goals, are really shaping the UN agenda. The kind of short form for them, you know, that here in New York, they call them the global goals. And the idea is that you make it less governmenty and less, you know, this high level thing, and actually encourage folks to take these goals and embrace them and live them. The process that was used to get the Sustainable Development Goals, right? There was global consultations where they went, the UN went kind of around the world and hosted consultations to listen to folks, and not just governments, not just rich people, but really went into communities and listened. As Matthew said, you know, the goals aren't perfect. There's plenty missing from the goals. But the goals really do and are shaping the UN agenda here in New York. And Matthew, I like your warning to us about COVID, that we can't use COVID as an excuse to forget all of the other work that was happening and needs to continue happening. And even this year at the Commission on the Status of Women, there seemed to be this focus on, well, what about COVID? What about, you know, yes, COVID has been a global phenomena, something that none of us, or most of us, depending on your age, you may have seen the Spanish flu, but most of us have not seen before, right? And so there's this opportunity for us to now say, well, you know, when we're looking at this, saying, well, let's look at how inequality affected how people were affected by COVID. So if we're looking at COVID all the time now, let's look at how inequality and racism and unequal development among nations and access to vaccines. You know, I live here in the United States. I'm looking out on my window over a street in New York City, and I know that my country has bought vaccines that we haven't even approved for use, while other countries have approved the AstraZeneca vaccine for use. And it's sitting in warehouses here in the US and not being distributed other places because we bought it and we're keeping it. We're keeping it for us. And so there's an opportunity with the Sustainable Development Goals for us to say, hey, let's look at this globally. let's take ourselves out of our local congregation, out of our local place. Matthew, you're from Edinburgh, Scotland. I'm from Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. Edinboro. I'm from Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. But how can our Edinburghs both succeed? And how can Tanga, Tanzania, and our two Edinburghs succeed at the same time, right? And that's what we have an opportunity to do here. And so I say the Commission on the Status of Women because the UCC is active there. We, as the World Council of Churches, are active there. Another campaign that we have that I'll put in the chat is the Thursdays in Black campaign. And this is something that everybody can participate in, no matter where you are, when, well, we like it on Thursdays, but when you wake up on Thursday, we are encouraging folks to wear black, recognizing that black is a color of mourning in a lot of places, but we in the WCC are using it to say, with this global campaign, to say, stop violence against women and girls. Stop gender-based violence. And so our Thursdays in Black campaign has really, so whether I'm in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania or Edinburgh, Scotland, we can wear black, and wearing it together on that day shows the global, right? So somebody in my grocery store will say, hey, Ryan, it's the middle of July. Why are you wearing all black? And I'll say, let me tell you why I'm wearing black today. Somebody in your local grocery store will say, hey, Matthew, why are you wearing black? And that's an opportunity for us to do that global thing, right? Global, local, right? And so we have opportunities like that where we can work both locally, but also work globally. And I think that's one of the kind of great things about these sustainable development goals is it's not either or. You don't have to be at the fancy table in New York City at the UN to be making achievements on the sustainable development goals. If you put solar panels on your church, and I see Reverend Susan is here, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll have some programs for that. I don't mean to put you on the spot there. I'm sorry, I should have talked to you before this about that. But maybe you can get a loan for solar panels on the church, or you can do the Thursdays in Black, or you can stop using paper cups at your coffee hour and encourage people to bring a mug with them, right? What are ways that we can be both global and local? And I think that's one of the great things about the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, I'll just add in here, Ryan, the SDGs, what we've said before, they're not perfect, but they provide a nice framework for us to start thinking about some of these issues. And it allows us to start doing some of this tracking and data collection so we can see where we started and how it's going along the way and where we've ended. So I think this is a good transition to Susan. Why don't you talk about how CBLF has used some of the Sustainable Development Goals?
I will. And just to address Ryan, and we have done some things in that area. So thank you, Ryan, for that segue. It was very impactful. And you are correct about how everybody can participate in carrying out the SDGs as we all push forward to a common goal. And that's sustainability of our earth and the people and everybody else that's on here. I want to start by telling a story or sharing the vision of Church Building and Loan Fund so that those who are here might understand how we got to where we are right now. And it's because of our vision and us following that vision and the work that we do, it really led us to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so part of our vision is to reinvent the concept of church by equipping church leaders to advance the gospel mission through innovative uses of buildings and space, created through unique partnerships, inventive church operating models, revenue generating, faith-driven enterprises, and the application of impact-driven metrics. And of course, along with everyone else, we seek to create a just world for all as we try to increase economic, social, and environmental and spiritual vitality, especially in neighborhoods across the United States where poverty obstructs abundant life for all people. So that's kind of how we got there. Now, just like most faith-based institutions and organizations in general, we collect data. We collect data in terms of how many churches we have worked with, how many leaders we've trained, how many loans we provided, the usual kind of number count. But the question became what really impact are we having by doing numbers? And as a church pastor and previously a new church start pastor, you begin to do the numbers game is what I call it. And so you report out on how many things you have done. But numbers really don't tell the story. It doesn't share what the real impact is in the community. For instance, if you will say in a church that you provided 10 scholarships for 10 students to go to college, and all of that is wonderful, but it doesn't reflect what the students did in college. Did they graduate and did they get a job? And then what are they doing in the world from that? Because all of that is your contribution to that impact. And so it really led us to look at the Sustainable Development Goals and really work at it. So we chose to work with Source and Impact, which is out of the David Eccles School of Business out of the University of Utah. And so with that, we are really seeking to build on the foundation values of our programming by gaining a greater understanding of our own impact. And so we have 4 pillars that we operate out of, and it's plan, raise, finance, and build. And so within those pillars, we have recorded data, data upon data upon data. And so with the sourcing group, when we turned over our data to them and we asked them to look at what we were producing in terms of the activities, the work, the services we were providing, how did they align with the sustainable goals? And believe me, we had no idea what that was going to turn out, nothing whatsoever. But with the data that we do have, we came to find out and understood that we actually are impacting 4 goals. Goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. Goal number 9, industry innovation and infrastructure. Goal number 10, reduce inequalities. And goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. And we were like blown away to know that. It's like, wow, we're doing that. But what we have is just really the first level of impact. We know that we're making some kind of impact in those areas, but we want to continue to actively work to bolster up our data capacity and collection efforts to allow further alignment with the SDGs. We have a plan, a vision plan that we call the Mission Implementation Strategy. And our implementation strategy is MIS for short. It's a 3-year plan where we set goals and we work over a 3-year period to achieve those goals. And so the next COVID really helped us in this because COVID allowed us to work like everybody else through Zoom and online, but it also gave us the time to really shape and work with the source and impact team to build and understand our own impact metrics. And so when we set our next 3-year period goal for 2022 through 2024, we will be able to align and adjust our goals and our outcomes so that they bolster up those goals that we find ourselves aligned with. So I want to use an example real quickly to just further extend how this can work with churches and any faith-based organization. We really encourage you to move in this direction. We chose to use some data that we have collected since 2009. And so we have data that says we have consulted churches to raise $15.8 million in capital campaign services. Those are the goals they raised. And we have a way of taking some of the fees that we collect, and we have what we call gifted fee allocations. And the gifted fee allocations are parts of the fees that we give back. And so they go to further mission development. And so we have given up approximately $188,000 in missions through our gifted fee allocations. But see, those are good numbers, but they really don't tell the story. And I think what people relate to today is the telling of the story. Y'all remember I'm a preacher, so you should never give the mic to the preacher. So we're telling of the story. We're telling of the story. And so the more you're able to relate that story to the daily lives of people, it has greater impact. And so numbers don't really tell the whole story. So we look deeper into the data, and we're now organized it in a way that we can see what else we're doing. We have noted, they created a map. We created a map. So now we know that we are impacting across the nation, from New Hampshire to Florida to California to Idaho to Colorado to Minnesota, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and everything in between, because those are the points that we have touched. And all that is good, but that's still not enough. So we're still digging for more and more. So we went back and we looked at, because churches are allowed to designate who the gifted fee allocation go to. And so we found out that amongst the churches that we have gone through our process, we have impacted places like urban community outreaches, the Pilgrim Pines Youth Camp, emergency resident shelter, church rural services, the Spirit of Sharing Soup Kitchen, Families Moving Forward, Camp Moval, Scholarship Fund, Coalition of Immokalee Workers. I don't know if I said that right, but don't hold it against me. Retreat centers. And those are what really touch people. Now, the $188,000 is good, but now we know, based on the alignment with our SDGs, that these are the kind of things that we're really impacting people with. And so, but still there's more to go. So the next phase of this, once we are working with Sorensen, we have our first impact report coming out this month, hopefully. We're in the final stage of editing. We also have a dashboard, which I recommend churches have a dashboard created so that you can keep the data in front of you, and at a moment's notice, you can pull reports, you understand where you are, what you're doing, and how you're impacting, and how you're promoting and pushing those SDGs. But we're going to go back and we're going to look at some of those places and people and churches and organizations and see what the organizations are doing. And that will further the story. And so it's really about telling a story about how you are impacting the communities and the world. And it could be through church ministries. It could be through churches who have affordable housing or seniors living or youth programs or whatever it is. It's important to collect that first level of data, but then you have to go back and really dig to see the impact that you're making. I am so grateful to Becca because she really introduced me to the SDGs and the conference and the work that is going on with them. And I think you see I'm excited about it, so I can't help myself. So I think it's a powerful way for us to engage the world and something that we all can get around. There's 17 of them, 17. And so there's something in it for everybody. And, they list goals, they list outcomes. It's just so helpful. If you go to the website, I know it's listed in the chat, and check them out. But we can do this. That's what this is about. We can do this if we all work together and push together for the greater good. I'll stop there because I'll keep talking as a preacher. So.
Thank you, Susan. That's excellent. So, they're called the Sustainable Development Goals, and maybe you're thinking, we're in the US, we're in a developed country, right? Why do we care about the Sustainable Development Goals? So maybe I'll ask Ryan and Susan, well, I guess Matthew as well. As living in developed countries, why do we need the Sustainable Development Goals? Why should we care about them?
You said my name first, so I'll start, and then we live in a developed country that in many ways is underdeveloped, right? If you look at our water system, Matthew was talking about the Ecumenical Water Network. Look at the water in Flint, Michigan. Look at inequality in our systems, in our justice system. Look at the number of children who are on free or reduced lunch because of that inequality. Their parents are working full time, but they are still, they can't afford to feed their children. So, I think we in the US get this kind of city on a hill idea about ourselves. If you look at the United States among global standards, we're not number one in almost anything except for number of death penalties. So if you look at the US and you think, oh, we're this city on the hill, we're the best, no, it's just not true. We need to work on it. There's a reality too that some of the global problems are the fault of countries like the United States, right? The mining industry and how the mining industry, I'm thinking of places like Peru, have really decimated local indigenous communities. It's because of the U.S. mining industry. And I'm not going against industry here. Don't hear me. But there are realities and consequences for how we do business, where we do business, how we act. And so for us in the U.S., like I said, we're certainly not, my favorite international index is the Global Happiness Index. And we're certainly not number one on the Global Happiness Index. I'll guarantee you that. But you should check it out just for fun. It'll make you happy. But the US really isn't number one almost anywhere. And what's great about these goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, rather than the Millennium Development Goals, the Millennium Development Goals were really ways for rich countries to help poor countries, right? It was this kind of, not kind of, it was an unjust system. It was the countries that benefited from exploiting other countries are now going to help the countries they exploited, right? This system, the Sustainable Development Goals, are goals for everybody. So, reducing carbon footprint, reducing gender inequality. In the US, we don't have paid maternal leave, right? At least not nationally at the federal level, right? And so what's great about these goals, and there's plenty that's not great, but what's great about these goals is that they're for every country. So the US can work on the US's problems, Canada can work on Canada's problems, and Scotland can work on Scotland's problems, and South Sudan can work on South Sudan's problems, and that's what I like about these goals.
Me. Go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, Susan, you go first, please.
Look, be careful what you say. Becca, when you said that we are a developed world, and I will, I don't totally agree with that, because there are many areas in the United States that are not developed. There are rural areas. There are areas in the city that we call cities, developed cities, that aren't developed. There are places where there is no drinking water. There's places where there's no internet. There's places where buses and trains and mass transportation doesn't exist. There's still places where people have to drive miles and miles and miles to get food. There are food deserts in our country, in the United States. So while we are perceived as development, that's not the whole truth. That's not the whole picture, in my opinion. And we certainly aren't sustained in any means or fashion. COVID showed us that, the winter storms in Texas showed us that, we're not ready. And what I like about these goals is that, while you can address the specifics, which is wonderful, I think you can identify what your immediate community needs are, which your, even your county and state and all those kinds of things. But more importantly, as we push for just war for all, because what happens in one country usually ends up happening in another country, and there's kind of this relay effect about what's happening. But it's something that we can globally, or what do you say? Reverend Karen Georgia says globally, do. And so it connects us. It helps us to understand that we are all still connected, even though we may live in different areas of the world. We are all connected. And I think that's important to know, because the pollution over here will certainly be the pollution across the seas. So it's not like we're going to contain pollution right over the United States, and that's the only place it's going to go. You know, one of the most powerful things that I watched was this documentary that showed about how the stuff we throw in the ocean or whatever, the trash collects and it all goes to one place. And it circles there forever and ever and ever. And it's like, but it's coming from everywhere. So I think it's important to realize that we're all at various degrees developed and sustainable. But if we work together, I'm a fan of us all being sustainable and developed.
Yeah, if I could follow up from that, Ryan and Susan, yeah, I completely agree with everything you've just said. That's so important. Perhaps one of the really awful things for anyone is to be poor in a rich country. Being poor in a poor country is also dreadful. So there's no getting away from that. But being poor in a rich country is just the pits. Geneva here in Switzerland is, at one level, in economic terms, one of the wealthiest cities per capita in the world. Switzerland is one of the wealthiest countries in the world per capita. The standards of infrastructure here are absolutely magnificent. The public transport system is just phenomenal. The train system in Switzerland, I think, absolutely no question, is the best in the world. You can plan to get across from one side of the country to the other and go on, say, 3 or 4 different trains, each with a, say, 2-minute connection. You can guarantee that you'll make that connection. And of course, that then boosts the country's economic capacity, because if you can plan something, you're not wasting time in traffic jams and or thinking you better take the car because just in case a train doesn't turn up. All of this is a virtuous circle of improvement. Yeah, and Switzerland is, at one level, it is extremely fortunate that with all its mountains, it gets most of its electricity from hydropower. But let's think what would happen in the event of climate change, that snowfall stops or is severely reduced. The glaciers in Switzerland are retreating. What happens if a landlocked country like Switzerland suddenly discovers for the first time in its history it has a water shortage? Global interdependency. We have to ask ourselves, why are there all these migratory pressures? Why do people want to leave their home and go and work in another country, live in another country where they may not know anyone, don't speak the language? Now, there's people like me who chose to go and work in another country. That's pure choice. It was it's an immense privilege to work at a global level. Really fascinating opportunity. But most people who move from one country to another are not in that sort of position of privilege. It's sheer desperation that forces people to move. Why do people move, say, particularly from countries like Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador, and they walk to the United States? And some people don't like this in the United States. And there are issues of, well, keep them out. Walls have been tried in many places and they don't work. Even the Berlin Wall didn't stop didn't keep people out. People still were able to cross it, even though they were being shot at. Let me just share with you a very personal example about interconnectedness. My wife is German. My father-in-law, he suffered polio as a child and serious malnutrition, because in 1945, the winter of 1945 and 1946, Germany basically, defeated country, it basically ran out of food. And there was near starvation. And it was thanks to the churches that food parcels were arranged. Now, my father-in-law might not have lived if it wasn't for the generosity of British churches who supplied food parcels that he, as then a 5-year-old child, had a chance in life. Today, Germany is a very wealthy, very prosperous country. Who knows where we might be one day? And as Christians, yes, we are our brothers' keepers. We are our sisters' keepers. We're human. We're not of one nationality. We're not divided by gender or color or all the other artificial distinctions. We're human beings. And before God even called me to be a minister of the church, the very first thing that God called me to be was be a human being. It's life in all its fullness. That's what it's about. Now, the SDGs are a secular initiative, but we're called to live in the world as it is, not necessarily the world as we would like it to be. Yeah, I'm in Geneva, prosperous, really amazing city. Yet there are still beggars. There are still beggars. You do see poverty. It's often incredibly well hidden, but it does exist. And yes, not everybody has the ability to take advantage of, say, well, why don't you just get on, get a job and all the rest of it? It's not always as simple as that for everyone. Not everybody has the same opportunities and luxuries in life. Yes, we are our brothers' keepers and our sisters' keepers. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, we're all affected by one another. Susan mentioned about water and about the pollution in the oceans. SDG 14. Now, do you like fish? Do you like eating fish? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Do you really want to eat fish which is contaminated by microplastics, with all the chemicals and the implications that that could be doing for your health and maybe for your descendants' health? SDG 14 matters. I remember seeing in Thailand a number of plastic water bottles which had just been discarded into a river, which would eventually, of course, flow into the sea. Now, that waste, goodness knows where it will end up. But it could, of course, be along the coast of Washington State, Oregon, and California. Perfectly easily. Or it might well come around the other way as well, and the whole eastern seaboard of the United States be affected. See? Global interconnectivity. So even from a purely selfish perspective, and you say, oh, this is all about sort of doesn't affect people like me and my community. Well, actually, yes, it does. Because if we don't take these things seriously, they're going to come and affect us whether we like it or not. You can take almost any one of these at random. And it's the old theory, Einstein's theory of relativity. Yes, for every action, equal and opposite reaction. And all of these all of these sayings. But you take any one of these at random and think about how it might affect you. In our own small ways, we can all contribute towards addressing them. I'll take one at complete random right now. Number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Myanmar, Burma, in Asia. Now, if the problem there with the military coup and seeing people being shot in the streets, if this festers further, of course there will be migratory pressures. And if it is allowed to continue, there are other bad regimes around the world who will be inspired by this. And that will have global knock-on effects. And then you have countries like the United States sending its own troops belatedly to address problems. See, we're all interconnected here. Sustainable cities and communities, SDG 11. Ryan mentioned about the town in, what's it, Flint in Michigan. Yeah, if cities and communities are not sustainable, if the place that you live is bad for you, that's not life in all its fullness. That's not Christ-like life in all its fullness. You deserve to live in a place which is good for you, and all people do. I've seen some brilliant communities, and I've seen some absolutely awful ones. A couple of years ago, I was in the city of Cotonou in Benin in West Africa. And seeing the level of poverty there was just something else. It's not because people are all stupid or because they're all corrupt or all lazy. Far from it. But the opportunities are grim. And of course, the pressure just to leave is colossal. And France, the former colonial power, of course, many people have sought to emigrate. And countries like this often lose their brightest and best people. These countries need doctors and lawyers and people who work for good government. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. If there is a good reason to stay in Guatemala, people will, of course, stay in Guatemala. They're not going to walk the whole way to the United States. And we can all help to make this happen. So the one thing I'm really pleading with everyone is to recognize our global connectivity. That my own grandfather served in the Royal Air Force in the UK during the Second World War. Quite ironically, he never actually flew on a plane in his life, but he was one of the people who repaired bombers which were going to fly over Germany night after night, no doubt bombing people who ended up becoming my relatives. Thank God that things are different now. Things can change, and change for the better. And we can all be part of change for the better. So let's remember that interconnectivity and what we can do just in a very small way to make these SDGs happen. But also let's look in a very structured way, how governments can make a difference, big corporations can make a difference. That when just down the road from me, just across the border in France, is the lovely little town of Evian. Many people have heard of Evian water. It's sold all over the world. But in the town of Evian itself, there's actually sometimes water shortages because the level of abstraction of water locally being shipped around the world in plastic bottles with all the environmental consequences of that transportation are so great that it has local impact. Is it really necessary? Yes, of course it tastes nice, but other water is good as well. Perhaps I leave it at that point.
Thank you, Matthew. Those are some great illustrations of our interconnectivity. And I want to stress that, all of you in your local churches, if you have some kind of, community outreach program, you're already contributing to the SDGs. Does your church have a food pantry? SDG number 2 is no hunger, right? So, we're already doing this work as local churches, as national churches, as international churches. I think every single one of our global partners is doing some of this work, not all of this work, right? But some of it. And they all kind of, go hand in hand, right? You get rid of hunger, it helps with the healthcare side of things as well. So I just wanted to say that now and to provide you maybe with another framework of looking at the work and the mission of your local church and your local community. And then we're getting close to time here, so I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. I want to thank you all for watching this. And it's been said before during this webinar, and I want to reiterate that we are called by God to care for our neighbors, and doing that work will also, help us with fulfilling the SDGs. It will help us, making a just world for all, the UCC's mission. To create a just world for all. So, the SDGs are one framework of looking at this. It's got its pros, it's got its cons. Hopefully that this has provided you with a little bit more information about the SDGs. I want to thank you all again for coming. This webinar has been recorded and it will be up on YouTube. You will receive a follow-up email with some links to our resources that were shared today. So keep an eye out on your email in the next couple of days for that, and feel free to share this recording with others who might be interested. So thank you all for joining us today.
Siblings in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed as you continue your day. Know that you are not alone, and we are holding you in prayer. Amen.